On the phone, we have a coaching legend. This gentleman coached my former favorite football player of all time in college at University of Pitt, Dan Marino, but he also coached at Mississippi State, A&M, Washington State, and he was assistant coach at a couple good programs too. Jackie Sherrill. I see that you were born in Oklahoma, but you went to Alabama for college. Wasn't that sacrilegious back then?
Well, I was Duncan, Oklahoma, and I grew up there till the ninth grade, and then moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, and was recruited by OU, Alabama, LSU, Tulane, Mississippi State, Georgia Tech, and I was going to OU because, during my youth years, OU was on that great 48-game winning streak, and so on Saturdays you'd watch OU play football. As a matter of fact, I remember watching the OU Notre Dame game where Notre Dame beat OU to break the record or to stop the record. And then when I moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, I was still going to OU, and Coach Bryant came in and visited with me for 2 hours, never asked me to come to Alabama. Just talked about Alabama, talked about the players, talked about different things. They were on their way to the Sugar Bowl, and Coach Bryant came down and to look at Biloxi, but in the meantime stopped and visited with me for a couple of hours. And that kind of changed my mind. I'd already taken a visit to Alabama, and on my visit, I still was going to go to Oklahoma, but after 2 hours with Coach Bryant, he never asked me to come, but I felt very comfortable, and that's ended up going to the University of Alabama, playing for Coach. Had a great teammates, from Nameless Sloan, quarterbacks were Nameless Sloan, Stabler, Hunter when I was there, and had the opportunity. They'd won it in 61, 62, that should have won it my freshman year, but in 64, 65, we won it back-to-back.
So Ole Miss didn't want you?
Did not want me. I guess they felt like I wasn't good enough to be a Rebel.
I'd have to think John Vaught might have regretted that at some point.
Well, we never lost to them. I played them in the Super Bowl, and I had that was my sophomore year, and Namath was suspended for the game. Matter of fact, he got suspended after the Miami game, and so Steve Sloan was the quarterback, sophomore quarterback, and I was fullback, tailback, linebacker, and played pretty well, and we won the game 12-9 or 12-7.
You had to have been a pretty good high school football player for the programs that recruited you, try to come after you. How good were you?
The older we get, the better we were. I've always said, I wasn't a great player, but I wasn't a bad player. So, I was, there were 67 of us that went to the University of Alabama, and to start the season, there was only like 3 out of the 67. Back then, freshmen couldn't play, but Coach Bryant had a saying for every sophomore that he started, you felt he'd lose a game. But, I had Coach Stallings was my defensive coach, and I got to start. We were opening the season with Georgia in my sophomore year, and we're on a Thursday practice on the goal line. Eddie Vesparelli was a linebacker, and really an outstanding linebacker fullback. And he called the wrong call on the goal line. He called his ball was on the 1-inch line, and he called goal line out instead of goal line in. Coach Stallings comes unglued and jerks him out, puts me in there, and I could imagine in that meeting with Coach Bryant saying he wants to start Jackie instead of Eddie. That probably didn't go over too well, but it happened. So I was one of the fortunate ones. Paul Crane, Steve Sloan, David Ray. We were I think the 4 freshmen and Tim Bates. So I think there was 5 of us that actually played our sophomore year.
Were his practices as difficult as they were made out to be, Coach Bryant?
Yes. You did not. Coach Bryant was a man's man. Everything you ever wanted in a man, he was. He's very physical, big man, 6'4", probably 250 to 270. And when we'd all be outside the locker room, kind of waiting to get ready to go out on the field. If he ever walked out of his locker room and was humming "We Shall Gather at the River," you did not want to go to practice because it was not going to be very easy. But I think that he probably said it the best. Years later, he had a reunion from the Junction guys, and he listened to them all tell what they were doing, how successful they were. And he got up and he made a statement. He said, all these years, and his wife was Miss Mary Harmon, and he said, all these years, I've always wondered if I did the right thing, meaning how he practiced the players. And he said, I know I did the right thing now after listening to how successful they are. And there's a lot to that. I mean, today, the problem that we have is, we have 4 types of players that are good and know they're good, players that are average, good and don't know they're average, players that are average and don't know they're average, and players that are average and know they're average. And there's very few coaches out there that can handle the 5-star or the players that are good and know they're good. And the coaches that can handle those are the coaches that win. Stoops, and the 2 out there right now that probably are the best is Saban and Stoops, that can handle those types of players, because you got to make them do something they don't want to do, and you got to make them accomplish things they didn't think they could. And that's one thing Coach Bryant could do. He made you do things you didn't want to do, but he also accomplished an awful lot of things that you never thought you could.
Well, and if you can get the most out of an average player and get close to the most out of an above average player, then I would assume that you're way ahead of the curve in terms of developing a team.
Absolutely. And, and you see it, it doesn't matter whether it's pro ball or college or high school or, even junior high school football. When you have players that are spoiled, you have players that are able to control things, and those are the players that completely destroy a football team. And I remember when I hear a coach tell me, well, the player is soft, and my retort back to him is, players play like they're coached. So if you're allowing him to be soft, he is soft. Don't put a label on a player if you're coaching him, because he plays like he's coached. And the same thing in pro ball. You have players, you wonder why certain coaches are able to take players and players that no one else really wanted and win with them, or players that, no one else could handle, and they end up being great players.
Coach Schellenberger told us a couple months ago that no one except for Joe Namath ever went into that tower at the practice field where Coach Bryant watched all the practices except for Joe Namath. Was that true?
when Joe was being recruited and how Joe got to Alabama, he was really going to go to Maryland, and the coach at Maryland had played for Coach Bryant or played with Coach Bryant, and he called Coach Bryant because he didn't want Joe to go anywhere else, and he had to compete against him. And when Joe came down for his visit, Coach Bryant invited him up on the tower. And he's the only player that was ever up on the tower. And it was kind of funny because when Coach was up on the tower, we'd have coaches that would be glancing up there to see if he was watching them or not. But during practice, if that chain ever rattled, everybody knew that something was going to happen because Coach Bryant was coming off that tower, and he never came off that tower until practice was over with unless something was going to happen.
Was it ever something good?
No. No. I remember, people ask what it was like to play for Coach Bryant, and I relay a story that it was the spring of between my junior and senior year, and they allowed the alumni to come. Coach Bryant did one practice in the spring, and the alumni were there, and Coach Bryant blew the horn, told the manager, saying louder to blow the horn. He blew the horn, and man, we were all excited because practice was over with. We ran inside and jumping up and down, and Coach Bryant walks in, saying louder to get all the alumni out and lock the gates. Now the gates were, 7-foot chain-link fence with 3 barbed wires on top, and anyway, he walks into the locker room and he points, you get dressed. There was only 3 of us that didn't have to go back out. Now we really were happy and dancing. And so when I walked out of the locker room, they were on the lower practice field, and I heard Coach Bryant holler at one of the players, Les Kelly, and he said, "Get Sherrill out here to show him how to do it." When I heard that, I went over that fence, over the barbed wire. I had no idea how I did it. But I wasn't going to hang around because I'd been there too many times.
Was there a championship in Alabama that stood out as your best one out of the 2?
The 65 probably was a better one because in 65, we only had, I think, 7 seniors out of the 67. And it was the smallest class Alabama really ever had as far as seniors. And, being able to win it with a small group of seniors, but, they were pretty good seniors.
Did you know coming out of college that you wanted to go into coaching?
No, I didn't go to school to be a coach. I started out in biology. Brother was pushing me to major in biology, tried to go to med school, and I rebelled like most kids do, and switched to business, took the accounting 1, aced it, accounting 2, aced it, and thought it was be a CPA. This is simple. I took costing theory, and my theory wasn't the same as that professor's. But anyway, I got a business degree and was started on my master's at Alabama, and then went to Arkansas, for Coach Broyles, and to finish it. And Coach Majors got the job at Iowa State, and he hired me at Iowa State, and that's how I got started coaching.
What was it that made Coach? Go ahead.
What
was it that made Coach Bryant such a successful coach with these assistant coaches? I mean, he churned them out. You had Pat Dye, yourself, Charlie Pell, Jerry Claiborne. It just seemed like the assistant coaches under him all succeeded. Howard Schnellenberger, Gene Stallings.
Well, Coach Bryant was a great, great teacher. And he allowed his coaches to coach. Coach Bryant really was a lot smarter than anybody imagined. And even today, you know, you have some coaches that can coach players and coaches. You know, your head coach really should be your motivator. Your position coaches coach, and people get that all wrong because especially today the head coach, the demands on him, he doesn't have the time to devote to really be the coordinator or be a coach. Now, yeah, I coach the kicking game. You can do that and still be a head coach. But make a long story short, Coach Bryant allowed his coaches to coach. He would set up all the practice. You'd come into the meeting. You'd have every period mapped out. And then from there, the coaches would, you know, put it together and they would actually coach. That doesn't mean that he didn't watch everybody, didn't know exactly what was going on, because he did. But he allowed coaches to coach. And I think today, if you become a coach, then you have to master your craft, and it takes many hours. And we see so many coaches today that really do not understand the game. All they have done was copied what somebody taught them. And technique fundamentals, very few of them have technique fundamental backgrounds.
Was Coach Bryant as tough on his assistants as he was on his players?
Yes. We played Vanderbilt one year, and we didn't play them like Coach Bryant wanted us to. And anyway, he called for an early meeting on Monday morning, and the coaches used to sit in the front row, Charlie Pell and Sharp and all those guys, Richard Williamson. And so he was talking about fundamental things, how to hold a football, how to tackle, I mean, very the main things. And he grabbed, and I don't remember if it was Sharp or Pell, but he pulled him up and knocked him back over 2 or 3 rows and pulled him back up and knocked him over again. And that afternoon, when we have our regular practice at 1:20, I believe it was 1:40 every day, none of the coaches ever sat in front of Coach Bryant. They all sat on the sides. But you never would hear Coach Bryant embarrass a coach. He never embarrassed a coach. Now, I can't tell you what he said behind closed doors, but on the field, you know, he was not that type of coach.
Wasn't it change working under Coach Johnny Majors?
Coach Majors was the best PR guy that's ever been in this business. And, you know, Coach Majors he knew football and he knew technique, but Coach Majors had Coach Brawls. You know, I had the opportunity to play and coach for Coach Bryant, and then for Coach Brawls, and then for Coach Majors. You know, Coach Brawls was probably business-wise the smartest. You know, he was able to do a lot of things business-wise, and still is. And Coach Majors was probably the best PR guy. And, you know, if he met you 20 years ago, he still can tell you your name.
Did you have much of a relationship with Johnny Majors before he hired you?
Just the year at Arkansas.
Okay.
And I remember he asked me what I could coach. And I said, Coach, if you're a coach, you can coach anything. But he he gave me the opportunity to be a head coach. He hired me, and I started out as a B team coach, and went to linebacker and went to defensive coordinator, assistant head coach, and at a very young age, I was 23 going on 24, and was a defensive coordinator and assistant head coach.
Was it hard being assistant coach at that age? Because there wasn't that much difference age-wise between you and the seniors.
No, it was probably the best thing it was, because there wasn't anything that they could do to. I mean, you always anticipated what they were going to do before they did it. And knock on wood, I never had a player lie to me. Coach Major allowed me to be in charge of discipline, and I never had a player lie to me. And it was, kind of, they may not have told the truth to other coaches, but they always told me the truth. And they knew that I was going to discipline them, and it wasn't going to be easy, but and that was, to them, they understood that.
You were right about Coach Broyles being a great businessman. I think his best decision was joining Augusta National.
That's right. Stevens, he's out of Little Rock. And back then, I think it was $20,000 was the initiation fee when Coach Broyles joined. And that was, I think, a gift from Stevens to Coach Broyles.
It's a pretty nice gift.
Yes. And, he's honored it very well. He has been a great member for Augusta.
Has he taken you out there at all?
No, but I've fortunately, I could call him today and he would, but fortunately I got to go play as a guest of George Bryan, and that's Sherrill Corporation.
Yes.
How'd you do?
Believe it or not, played really well. That when you go there, the only thing you're concerned about is playing amen corner, because and so I don't know what I shot on the front side, but I want to say 40-something, 41. But on the back side, I bogeyed 10, par 11, par 13, birdied 12. I bogeyed 10, par 11, par 12, birdied 13, par 14, birdied 15, par 16, double 17, and bogeyed 18.
You'll never forget that score.
No, I can tell you almost every shot too.
Is it that way when you recall football games as well? That you can sort of relive it on a play-by-play basis?
You do. You remember probably things that other people don't remember. I always charted the game. When I started as a GA for Coach Bryant and go out and scout, you'd be watching the play and writing at the same time in the press box. So I developed a habit of being able to write and watch at the same time. And I remember we're playing Mississippi one year, and Jolie Dunn asked on the sideline, what had they done on third down? I said, they've thrown 3 posts and a hitch. And he looked at me like, how do you know? And I always charted the game, and then after the game, or at halftime, I was able to study it. And after the game, I converted on the play-by-play sheet, and then watched the film, with the coaches. So when I watched the film with the coaches, I knew pretty well what's going to happen before the play started. And it was just a way for me to stay ahead and also to, stay in the game.
Yeah.
You see coaches today on the sideline and they don't do anything. They just walk up and down.
Yeah, they'll occasionally yell at the referees, things like that. Yeah, but you do sort of wonder.
You didn't. Yeah, I always told the wing guys, I said, if you don't have earplugs in, go get them. And they all laughed. I mean, they knew it was going to be tough. I never got upset on a judgment call, but on error calls where they mismarked or did something mechanically wrong, then that's when I got upset.
Did you recruit Tony Dorsett to Pittsburgh?
Yes, I did.
Tony told us that he wanted to go to Penn State and he would have went there, but Joe Paterno never talked to him once, and that's why he decided to go to Pittsburgh. Was that true?
No. Tony went up on an official visit, I think the week or 2 weeks before national signing, and he visited with Paterno on Tuesday morning, and it confused him. They were having a track meet Tuesday afternoon, and so I get to the school around noon, and the track coach come up and started hollering at me. Not, technically, but he was not very happy with me because he had thought that I had talked Tony into quitting track. But Tony had, after he visited with Penn State, he came in, turned his uniform in, and I went from 12 o'clock till 12 o'clock at night trying to find him, couldn't find him, and finally I called his mother to find him. So I drive back to Pittsburgh, take a shower, change clothes, come back, and get back about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm parked outside his house in the parking lot, and I'd see these lights come on around me. We're in the projects, and they wanted to know who that white narc was out there in the parking lot. But I wasn't going to let anybody else get to him.
There's a lot of really good and great high school players that sort of fizzle out on the collegiate level. What was your sense of that Dorsett was a surefire All-American and that became a Heisman Trophy winner?
Speed. He could have been an Olympic sprinter if he really wanted to. He had speed that no others had at that time. And I don't know what his times were or how fast. I think he told me he probably was a sub 4.3 when in pro ball, but just the explosion that he had, his hands, even though he was small, and matter of fact, the first day at the high school principal kicked me out of the high school. They had converted a closet into a meeting room for all the coaches coming in. I'm in the room waiting my time, and then I go in to meet Tony and Ed Wilimowski. And the door burst open, and the guy says, "Who are you?" And I told him, "Jackie Sherrill." And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Pittsburgh." He said, "Get out." And he actually threw me out of the high school. And I went back every day, and we became friends. Matter of fact, I was there so much they thought I was a teacher.
Did the guy who threw you out, was he a Penn State alum or something?
No, he was the principal. The previous staff had said that Tony was too small to play college football. They only weighed 158 pounds.
Yikes.
So how did you end up going back to Pittsburgh when Johnny Majors decided to go to Tennessee?
Well, I was at Washington State. I wanted to be a head coach. I had a chance to go to Kansas State the second year, but I had a goal to be a head coach by 31, and so I went to had an opportunity to go to Washington State, and I remember calling Coach Bryant, and I said, Coach, they want me to stay at Pittsburgh because they're kind of concerned that Coach Majors will leave next year and go to Tennessee. And he kind of, talked like Coach Bryant talked and said, I can't tell you what to do, but then he told me what he did when he was in the same situation and he had a chance to stay at Alabama or go to Maryland. And his father-in-law told him, if they want you now, they'll want you later. If they don't want you now, they don't want you later. And when Coach Bryant told me that, that's when I knew I was going to go to Washington State. And so when I went there, and during the interview, they were concerned I would not stay, and I told them there'd be only two jobs I would leave for, and that would be Pittsburgh or Alabama. Well, they figured both of those jobs wasn't going to come open.
When you took the Washington State job, did you think you would be there for more than a year at least?
Oh, yes. I remember this when I got there. The town was only 3,000 population. That's excluding the university. There was one restaurant, one hotel that probably had 10 rooms, maybe 5 rooms. And so, going from Pittsburgh to Pullman, Washington, was a pretty good change in scenery.
Yeah, I would have thought the change from Ames, Iowa to Pittsburgh would have been an upgrade.
Well, we got lucky because I hired
Washington State's just was sort of out there.
Yeah, so yes, but I hired a coach off of UCLA staff, and we had USC's and UCLA's recruiting list, and we went after all the kids over 25, meaning that, it may have been 30 back then, but we went after the kids that were right over the list, and we were able to get like 5 or 6 kids that were on their list that ended up being all Pac-10 Pac-10 players. So the recruiting was the year we went there was really outstanding, and it ended up winning a lot of games, or that class did.
Did Johnny Majors recommend you to the athletic director of Pitt to succeed him?
I can't answer that, but being there, they all knew me, so I was probably their choice and the player's choice. So it was pretty easy transition to come back. And if I had been a better coach, we probably would have won it two times in the 5 years that I was there.
What was the recruiting process for Dan Marino like?
Danny was not a hard recruit. His family was Pittsburgh. He came from, right there in Oakland, went to Central Catholic, and Danny really wanted to play baseball, and I was concerned it was going to be Arizona State or Arizona or Clemson, because Danny wanted to play baseball, great baseball player. And I was fortunate enough to talk him out of it. And I don't know if I talked him out of it because he still wanted to play baseball. And Kansas City signed him, drafted him, and they came in to sign him, but back then, the NCAA changed the interp right in the middle of the year. You had Danny Ainge, you had Gibson at Michigan State, and you had Wilson that had signed with Maryland, that were on football scholarships but were allowed to sign baseball contracts and go play baseball in the summer. Well, they changed that interp. It wasn't up for a vote. They just sat around the table at the conference, NCAA conference office, and changed the interp. So if Danny had signed a baseball contract, then he could not, or any kid could not be on a scholarship. They would have to pay their way to college to play football. So, you know, it was kind of interesting, and I was kind of, you know, glad he didn't sign a Major League Baseball contract.
How good a quarterback was he coming out of high school?
He was a man playing with kids. He was so far ahead of other kids, it was unreal. I mean, he all-star games, he was just that far ahead of everybody else. We filmed him early when he came in, his throwing motion, and I asked him, Danny, who taught you how to throw the football? And he says, my dad. I said, well, what did he tell you? And he said, the ball goes up and out. And, you know, technically that's very simple, but that's what the ball does. You know, everybody else throws in all these angles, but if you want to teach a kid how to throw the football, just put in his mind that the ball goes up and out.
You teach you coach multiple Hall of Famers in the NFL. Dan Marino, Chris Stolman. Was Dan the best one you ever coached, talent-wise?
What position? You know, I think I had, you know, I was very lucky. I had the opportunity to coach probably the best in almost every position, you know, from, you know, recruiting Tony, but Danny, Chris Dolman, or you can go Ray Childress, you can go on Johnny Holland, go on and on, Smith, J.J. Johnson, some of the best linemen. Our offensive line at Pittsburgh was going left to right was Jimbo Covert, Emil Bors, Russ Grimm, Bill Fralick, and Mark May.
That was better than most NFL teams back then.
Well, two of them are in the NFL. And then you had Hugh Green, Ricky Jackson at defensive ends. But, you know, Russ Grimm's in. There's no question Jimbo will go into the Hall of Fame. Fralick will, and Mark May eventually will.
But you knew where to play guys, though, because Russ Grimm was a defensive lineman originally, right?
No, he was a quarterback, fullback, linebacker. And we recruited him to play linebacker. And when I called him in the office, and I said, Russ, we're going to move you to offensive line. I didn't say center, but I may have. And he said, Coach, I've never had my hand in the dirt. I don't want to do that. And I said, Russ, I'm not asking you if you want to. I'm telling you you're going to go to offensive line. And so he called Joe Pendry at West Virginia, and he was going to transfer. And so I 2 days later, I hired Joe Pendry, and Joe Pendry's in the locker room at Pitt. And Russ walks in, and he says, what are you doing here? And he said, Coach Sherrill just hired me. You're not going anywhere. But he had so much natural ability. There's two centers that I've had that, with great natural ability, and both of them lasted a long time. Jerry Fontenot was the other one I had at A&M, and Jerry was a high school state wrestling champ out of Louisiana, but both of them had just unnatural ability. They could do an awful lot of things.
When you went to Texas A&M from Pitt, you signed a contract that then was for a lot of money. Nowadays, it's not quite peanuts, but it pales in comparison to what coaches make nowadays.
Well, but there were other coaches that had contracts bigger than what I signed. You know, Joe Paterno at Penn State had a bigger contract. You just couldn't get his contract. Never could. No one ever got his. But even back then, he had $1 million life insurance policies paid up. So, you know, over the life of the policy, all it was doing was generating interest that he ended up being able. So, and I want to say he had 4 $1 million life insurance policies paid up.
Was that loss to Penn State in 1981 the toughest loss of your career?
Yes, we were number one in the nation, or one of them, and we would have had a chance to win it all. But you know, we got greedy. We had Danny, and they were dropping 9, and we didn't run the football. We just kept on throwing it, and you know. So then we ended up going and playing it, but it helped. You know, we went and played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl with Herschel Walker, and you know we were behind, and you know I called, the ball was on the 20-yard line. I called Danny and I said, we got plenty of time, and we moved it down the field, and the ball was on the 34-yard line. It was 4th down, 4th and 3. And I called timeout, called Danny over, and I said, Danny, we either can kick the field goal, tie it, and try to get the ball back, or we can go for it and try to win it. And he looked me right square in the eye and he says, Coach, we're not here to tie this damn game. So we go for it. And the play that was called was we were taking the two backs and going to cross them clear, take the 2 backs, cross them, and they were going to pick the linebackers because we knew that they would either be probably in man and playing the 8-man front. Well, they blitzed. They played 3 deep and blitzed 8. So the backs had to block. Then he saw the blitz and read the blitz. He actually took 2 steps deeper than his normal drop and threw the ball to the tight end on a skinny post. And that was, you know, it had to be perfect execution to win the game because they rushed 8. We only had 7 to block, so Danny had to pre-read the blitz and get rid of the ball before one could get to it.
Was Marino's greatest asset his arm or his ability to read defenses?
All of it.
All of it.
Plus quick feet. You know, people don't realize, Danny wasn't going to run a 4.5. But in the pocket, he was quicker than most 4.5 guys. Every day after practice, he would jump rope. He had a little board in front of his locker, and he'd come in every day and jump rope for about 10 minutes.
How did the 12th man start at A&M?
Well, that's a long story, but basically going to the bonfire and watching them build and getting involved with the bonfire, and then coming back and watching them pass the red pot one night. And basically what that, the passing was that you took slats. So the first one bent over and he took 3 slats from the axe handle. And when you have enough, you say, take your best lick. And he did that. The axe handle broke. So when it breaks, you start all over. So he had 7 slats with an axe handle, no emotion. And I knew what that felt like because I'd been there before. And I said, there's 40,000 students. I can find 11 kids that are tough as nails that could care less about their body just to cover kickoffs. And so we put an ad in the paper. There were 252 that signed up. We whittled it down to 40, and they came out to spring practice, and then we would keep 20 in the fall. But, when you look at how good they were, it's kind of like you're taking a special op team and you're training them to do one thing. They were on the field 30 minutes prior to practice doing open field tackling. They'd go through practice as scout team players and get beat up, and then they would stay out 30 minutes covering kickoffs. So they had an hour a day working on kickoffs. And so that was 5 hours a week. And you look at teams today, they probably spend 10 minutes covering kickoffs.
Was there any resistance from anybody at the university?
Not at the university. On the coaching staff there was.
They think you're crazy?
Yes, they did. RC thought I was crazy. RC said, Coach, you sure you didn't fall off that stack? He said, there's no way you can take kids that are not recruited and cover kickoffs. But they were good. And it wasn't like they didn't go against the best. Tim Brown, Metcalf, Bo Jackson. They won against the best out there, and their average was 12.5.
I'd say that's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were number 1 in the nation 2 out of the 5, and always in the top 5. But 12.5 today, if you got a 25-yard average, then you're good.
You coached Tony Dorsett. You mentioned Herschel Walker and now Bo Jackson. Was Tony the best out of those 3 in college?
He was the fastest. He wasn't the biggest, but you never got a shot on Tony. Tony, I don't think Tony ever got hit in college. The only time he ever got hit was in practice. And that was my fault, because we were doing a half line drill and I knew the play and I had the linebacker and I shoved the linebacker outside to scrape off the defensive end, and he ran off tackle and the linebacker hit him, burst his chin, and Coach Majors would never let me do that again. Never had a half-line drill again.
Winning 3 consecutive Southwest Conference titles, I assume, is among the highlights of your career, and then going to bowl games after each of those, winning a couple.
The Cotton Bowl, years ago, you had 4 bowl games: the Rose Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and those were the big ones. Mm-hmm. And they signified the Cotton Bowl signified that you were the champs of the Southwest Conference, and so that carried. I remember, and this is a true story. When I first went to A&M, I had an alumni drive me around in Houston because I didn't know where I was going. And we're on I-10, that's the interstate. And we start talking about bowl games, and I said, there's plenty of bowl games. There's Gator Bowl, plenty, and they just started a great bowl game in Hawaii. He slams on the brakes in the middle of I-10. He looked at me and he says, Jackie, The only place we want to go is the Cotton Bowl. You get us to the Cotton Bowl, we'll bring in the palm trees, the sand, and we'll bring in the water. Because that was the standard. And Texas had been to either Texas or Arkansas, but basically Texas, and kind of like the Sugar Bowl to the SEC. That was the standard. And you wanted the Rose Bowl to the Pac-10 or Big Ten. And that meant so much to get to the Cotton Bowl. So when we went to the Cotton Bowl, played Auburn, and beat them 36-16, that was a big, big deal.
Was it hard to join a program when you went to Mississippi State that hadn't had any success in years?
Yes and no, but I think all coaches are kind of different. I don't know of any coach that's ever told you that he's had a bad recruiting year or doesn't think he can win. So, but I kind of had the advantage because growing up in Biloxi, I knew the climate, and in the state of Mississippi, if you can keep the kids in the state and get the majority of the kids, you're going to have a chance to win, because there's an awful lot of great players that are 2-stars that end up being 5-stars that no one knows about. East Texas and Mississippi are kind of very similar.
I mean, look at Brett Favre. No one knew about him.
There's a lot of them. I mean, there was a little old running back out of that went to Jackson State that no one knew about either.
Yeah, Walter Payton did pretty well for himself, didn't he?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you can go into history. There's an awful lot of great players that came out of Mississippi, and there still is. I mean, you look at today, and there's quite a few that have come out and that were not recruited by anybody. And when I was there, I used to pass on some kids in the Delta that I kept kicking myself because I just felt that they would be great players one of these days, but we just didn't have room. And sure enough, some of those kids end up being first-round draft choices.
Is there a player that you missed out on that you think was your biggest loss?
Yeah, there was a receiver that went to Southern Mississippi. There was a offensive lineman from the Delta. Those two kids are continue to pop up. That ended up being first-round draft choices. And, I've been smarter, but if you're at Mississippi State, you got to work harder. You got to do a better job of evaluating, and it just like the middle linebacker at Mississippi State today, he was a 2-star, and he'll be probably a first-round draft choice. You look at the defensive end, and he was a 2-star. He was a quarterback out of high school, and even the middle linebacker was a quarterback, I believe, out of high school. We had Greg Favors that came out of Atlanta, for example, that no one really recruited, and he was a quarterback in high school, played point guard and led the city in Atlanta in scoring, but he was going to be a linebacker in college. And you just have to evaluate kids in kind of places. David Smith, Stewart, the kid out of North Alabama that played for the Falcons for years, same thing. No one recruited him.
Was there ever a temptation to go into pro ball?
In the 80s, I had a chance with the Oilers, Bud Adams, and we became friends and stayed friends. But Bud Adams came up and visited, and I just felt like I was doing some things here, and I wasn't smart enough back then to even realize what I was being offered.
After you retired from Mississippi State, in '03. What were the temptations to come back to coaching? I have to assume people came a calling.
Well, you had an opportunity, but I started doing some other things, doing radio and television, and then, as the years kind of passed by, can you coach? Yes. I've done some consulting work especially in the kicking game. And that's one place that coaches in the country you'd see, and I feel really bad for the players because there's no one that can coach techniques. They have no idea why a kid misses a field goal, or it may not have been his fault. It may have been the holder's fault, but they don't know that. Same thing with coaching punters, or I was helping a kid one time, and the coach called me, and playing in Kansas, and I called him after the game, and I said, "Did you apologize to the kid?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you knew better to let the kid try to on a directional kick from the right hash mark." He said he was doing so well, I just thought he'd be good. And I said, "Well, it was pretty good when he had a 0 punt." And I said, "That wasn't his fault. That was your fault. You asked him to do something he couldn't do."